under fire, with a general screaming into the radio and two snipers pinning down an entire forward operating base. One woman picked up an M24 sniper rifle that nobody gave her permission to touch. She chambered around, found her position behind a crumbling wall, and didn't ask anyone for approval. Because she didn't need it. The general didn't know her name, didn't know her record, didn't know the rifle in her hands had been issued to her 3 years ago at the top of her class. The same class where she'd outscored every man in the room. All he knew was what he saw, and what he saw made him furious. What happened next ended the firefight, and what came after that ended the general's argument permanently. Before we show you the exact shot that silenced both the enemy and the man shouting at her, and the 3 words she said after that nobody in the command tent has ever forgotten, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit subscribe with the bell icon on, because this story doesn't end with a medal. It ends with something quieter than that, and somehow much more powerful. The dust at Firebase Kestrel never settled properly. It lifted, it drifted, it hung in the air like something undecided. Mortar dust, tire rubber, diesel exhaust, the fine grit of the Kandahar Valley floor ground down to powder under the weight of machines and men who had no reason to be gentle with anything. Staff Sergeant Camille Reyes stepped off the rotary cargo flight at 0614 without anyone meeting her. That was fine. She hadn't expected a welcome. Her kit was modest. 1 duffel, 1 hard case, long and narrow, the kind that answer questions before you ask them. Regulation locked. Scuff marks along the left latch from the last deployment. Her uniform was clean, but not new. The kind of clean that came from discipline, not from rear echelon living. Her rank patch was sewn precise and flat against her sleeve. No crooked stitching, no loose thread. She was 29 years old, 5'7", lean through the shoulders the way distance runners were lean, all function, nothing decorative. She walked the perimeter road toward the check-in annex, and nobody stopped her, but everybody noticed. A cluster of infantrymen near the motor pool watched her pass. One of them leaned sideways toward his buddy. She with the JAG office? His buddy squinted. Doesn't look like JAG. Press pool, maybe. The man nearest the fence post shook his head slowly. She's carrying a long case. None of them said anything after that, but they kept watching. At the operations annex, a tired-looking duty sergeant ran her credentials through the system without looking up. His eyes moved across the screen, stopped, moved again. He looked up for the first time. Staff Sergeant Reyes. That's right. You're in for the 72-hour marksmanship assessment rotation. That's what the orders say. He looked back at the screen, then at her, then at the long case resting against her leg. He didn't ask about it. He printed her assignment slip and slid it across the counter. Barracks C, East End. Briefing at 0800. She took the slip without comment, picked up her duffel, and walked out. On the board behind him, her name had been posted under observer attachments. Near the bottom, printed in the same institutional font as every other name on the list. No distinction, no flag, just Reyes C. Attached, marksmanship eval, 72 hours. It told you everything about what the duty sergeant thought she was there to do. Nothing about what she was actually capable of. The briefing at 0800 was conducted by Captain Lyndon Strauss. Strauss was 41, career infantry, chest like a refrigerator, voice that carried across open ground without effort. He'd done 3 rotations in this valley, knew every ridgeline by the sound the wind made crossing it. He ran his briefings like he ran his unit, tight, fast, no softening. He covered the AO. He covered the threat assessment. He covered patrol schedules and communication protocols. His eyes moved around the room the way experienced officers' eyes moved, taking inventory, sorting people into categories without appearing to do so. When they landed on Reyes, they paused for exactly 1 second, then moved on. She sat in the 3rd row, back straight, notepad open, writing in that compact, even script that didn't waste paper. She asked no questions during the briefing, requested no clarifications, made no comments. Strauss wrapped up at 0847. As the room cleared, he gestured to the junior officer beside him, who authorized the weapons assessment rotation. The junior officer checked the manifest. General Holt's office. Joint Training Compliance Review. Strauss looked toward the door where Reyes had already exited. His jaw moved once, like he was chewing on something that didn't sit right. She's staying for active ops or just the evaluation? Orders say 72 hours. Evaluation plus observation. She carry her own rifle? The junior officer looked at the manifest again. Long case, sir. Logged on arrival. Strauss said nothing, but he thought something. You could see it in the set of his eyes, the way a man thinks something he knows better than to say out loud in a room with witnesses. He thought, observation. He thought, probably one of Holt's compliance people. Somebody to make sure the numbers looked right. He thought, 72 hours, in and out, shake the box, write the report, leave. He didn't think, marksman. He should have. The evaluation range was southeast of the main compound, past the vehicle staging area and the fuel point. 200 meters of open ground ending at a berm, with pop-up steel targets at 300, 500, and 800 meters. Wind flags every 100 meters. Standard layout. The kind of range that looked routine until you started hitting the 800-meter targets in a crosswind and realized routine was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Reyes arrived at 1,000 hours with the long case under her arm. The range master, Sergeant First Class Dubrow, was already there with 2 other soldiers who'd been assigned as part of the evaluation panel. Dubrow looked at her case. That your personal issue? Yes, Sergeant. M24? Yes. He crossed his arms. Not hostile exactly. More like a man setting weight on a scale before he decided how much he trusted what was about to happen. Evaluation protocol is 10 rounds at each distance. Wind reading, dope your own scope, no coaching. Understood. He gestured at the bench. Whenever you're ready. She set the case down, unlocked both latches, and opened it. Inside, the M24 sniper rifle sat in foam-padded channels the way something sits when the person who owns it takes care of it. Not obsessively clean, just clean. The cleaning kit tucked alongside it showed use. The scope caps were off because she'd expected to shoot today. She pulled the rifle, checked the bolt, ran her thumb along the magazine well, and seated herself at the bench with the kind of settled, unhurried motion that looked like she'd done this 10,000 times. Because she had. Dubrow watched without comment. The 2 evaluation soldiers exchanged a glance. She sent the first round downrange at the 300-meter target. The steel rang. She cycled the bolt without lifting her head from the cheek weld. Second round. Third. The pattern repeated with the mechanical regularity of a metronome. Not fast. Not showy, just precise. At 500 meters, she paused, read the near wind flag, adjusted her scope 2 clicks right, and resumed. 10 rounds, 10 impacts. At 800 meters, the wind picked up. A lateral gust from the northwest that made Dubrow's eyebrows shift upward half a centimeter. The kind of condition that cost first-round hits even from experienced shooters. She sat still for 11 seconds, reading. Calculating. Her fingers moved once on the elevation dial, once on windage. First round, steel rang. Second round, steel rang. Dubrow stopped watching the target and started watching her. Not with skepticism anymore, with something more careful. By the time she cleared the rifle and safed it, the evaluation was finished. 30 rounds, 30 impacts. No misses, no corrections requested, no complaints about conditions. Dubrow looked at his scoring sheet. He wrote something. He turned to the 2 evaluation soldiers. Log it clean, he said simply. She was already packing the case. One of the soldiers leaned toward the other and murmured, "Who is she?" The other one shook his head. No idea. Nobody thought to ask her directly. It was the kind of assumption that cost you later, when the person you assumed was nobody turned out to be the only reason you came home. The attack came on the 3rd night. Firebase Kestrel wasn't supposed to be a priority target. It was a logistics waypoint, a refueling stop, a coordination hub for 3 separate patrol sectors. Not glamorous, not strategic in the way that made the enemy expend real resources, which is exactly why the 2 snipers they hadn't identified chose it. The first round came at 0217 hours. It hit the antenna mast on the comms building without injuring anyone, but the sound it made was unmistakable to every person on that base who'd been shot at before. Not a pop, a crack, a specific, deliberate crack that came from elevation and distance. The second round hit 12 seconds later. Closer. The guard post on the north wall. The base went to alert faster than most bases did, because most of the people on it had been in places where alarms didn't come before casualties. They moved to cover. They returned fire into darkness at distances they couldn't confirm. They called for support that was 12 minutes out at minimum. And in the chaos, someone started screaming on the command net. General Marcus Holt had arrived at Firebase Kestrel 3 hours earlier for an unscheduled logistics review. He was not a man who moved quietly or took situations calmly. At 61, he was all jaw and volume, the kind of general who believed that command presence meant making more noise than anyone else in the room. He'd earned his stars in the 90s, served through 2 decades of conflict, and somewhere along the way decided that his instincts were always right, regardless of who was in the room with him. He was behind the command post barrier when the third round hit the vehicle staging area. He keyed his radio. "Where is the shooter? Someone give me a grid. Where's the shooter?" Nobody gave him a grid, because nobody knew. The 2 enemy snipers had positioned themselves on the ridgeline to the northeast, using a natural fold in the terrain that read as dead ground on the thermal drones. Low profile, well-covered, patient. They weren't trying to overrun the base. They were trying to pin it. Keep every head down, keep every vehicle stationary, and wait for a resupply convoy that was 30 minutes out on the eastern approach road. It was a good plan. It would have worked. That was when Reyes moved. She'd been in full kit since the first shot. Her M24 was in her hands, bolt closed, round chambered, scope caps off. She moved along the inner wall of the base toward the eastern fighting position, not running, not crouching dramatically, just moving with that flat efficiency that didn't waste motion or energy on things that didn't help her get there faster. The fighting position was a sandbag enclosure on the northeast corner, elevated 2 feet above ground level. Direct line of sight to the ridge. The angle was workable. The distance, by her estimate, was approximately 740 meters. The wind was coming southwest, light, consistent, the kind she'd accounted for twice a day for 3 years. She settled behind the sandbags, got her position, and started reading the ridge. She didn't fire immediately. That was the thing about real marksmen. They didn't fire immediately. They looked. They found the geometry. They let the problem solve itself through patience and applied skill rather than reaction and luck. 18 seconds passed. Then she saw it. A muzzle signature. Small, brief, partially masked by a rock formation. But enough. She had the position. She was halfway through her sight picture when the voice hit her like a physical thing. Who gave that soldier a rifle? General Holt had moved up behind the eastern fighting position and was staring at her from 5 meters back, his face red in the pale green glow of the base's emergency lighting. His radio operator stood behind him, expression carefully neutral. 2 infantrymen who'd been returning fire from the adjacent position looked over. Who authorized this? Who gave her that weapon? Who is she? She didn't move, didn't lift her head from the cheek weld, didn't turn to answer. Staff Sergeant Reyes. Her voice was flat, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't give volume to things that didn't deserve it. The weapon was issued to me, sir, 3 years ago, at the top of my class. This is a live fire situation. I want to know your authorization to... General. Still not moving. Still in her position. I have the shooter's location. Request 30 seconds. You don't get 30 seconds. You get off that weapon, and you... The 4th enemy round hit the sandbag wall 8 inches from Holt's left shoulder. The general dropped. The radio operator dropped. The 2 infantrymen pressed flat. Reyes didn't move. She exhaled half a breath. Held it. Settled the reticle. Squeezed. The M24 barked once. A clean, controlled report that rolled across the dark compound and disappeared into the valley. On the ridge, 738 meters to the northeast, the first sniper position went silent. She cycled the bolt without ceremony. Found the second signature. The partner position she'd marked 4 seconds before Holt had started yelling. The secondary location she'd cataloged while he was asking questions that could wait. She'd seen the geometry of it. 2 shooters, offset 40 degrees from each other, designed to cover mutual dead ground. She found the position. She fired once more. The second position went silent. For a full 10 seconds, Firebase Kestrel was quiet. Not the quiet of a lull, not the desperate quiet between incoming rounds. The actual quiet, the kind that meant it was over. Reyes lifted her head from the cheek well for the first time. She cleared the rifle, safed it, and set it down across the sandbags. Then she turned to face the general, who was rising from his crouch with the particular expression of a man recalibrating something he'd been very sure of. She looked at him steadily, not with anger, not with triumph, just the direct, patient look of a professional who had just done her job. "Sir," she said. 3 words. Not an answer to a question he'd asked, just an acknowledgement that she saw him, and that he could now decide what to do with what he'd just seen. The radio crackled. A voice from the convoy on the eastern approach road. "Kestrel Base, this is Echo 4. We're holding at the checkpoint. Report status." Someone keyed the radio. "Echo 4, this is Kestrel. Threat neutralized. Clear to proceed." General Holt said nothing. His jaw moved once, the way jaws did when words were being considered and rejected in sequence. Reyes picked up her rifle, checked the bore, and walked back toward the barracks without asking for anything. By 0400 hours, the compound was running on adrenaline and coffee. In the command post, Strauss sat with his intel sergeant reviewing the thermal drone footage that had finally rendered a clear picture of the ridge. 2 confirmed positions, both neutralized, both at ranges that, when he read the distance markers on the overlay, made him exhale slowly through his nose. 738 meters on the first one, the intel sergeant said. 761 on the second. Crosswind approximately 12 miles per hour, variable. Strauss looked at the screen. 2 rounds. 2 rounds. Time between shots. The sergeant checked the timestamp. For seconds. Strauss leaned back and crossed his arms. He didn't say anything for a moment. The kind of silence that happens when a man is honest with himself about a mistake in judgment that he can't take back. General Holt entered the command post at 0412. He was carrying his own coffee, which was the first unusual thing. He normally had someone carry it for him. He pulled a chair and sat across from Strauss without preamble. "Where is Staff Sergeant Reyes?" Strauss checked his watch. "Barracks C at this hour, sir. She's got a debriefing at 0600. I want her file." The intel sergeant pulled it on the terminal. It came up in full. Holt read it in silence, his expression shifting through something complex and not entirely comfortable. Certified L3 Army Sniper. Top qualification score in her graduating class at Fort Benning. 2 prior deployments, 1 in Iraq, 1 in this same valley 18 months earlier. Commendation for marksmanship in the second deployment. A record that didn't announce itself. Just sat there, documented, patient, the way her voice had been patient when she answered him. He read the last line of her fitness report from her previous commanding officer. Quiet professional. Executes without expectation of recognition. Highest value asset in the unit. Trust her with anything at distance. He closed the file. His radio operator was watching him carefully. Everyone in the room was watching him carefully in the way people watched when they knew a thing had happened that required acknowledgement, and they were waiting to see if the person who needed to acknowledge it would. "Get her here at 0500, Holt said. Before the debriefing. Strauss nodded once. "Yes, sir." The 0500 meeting was brief. Not because either of them kept it short on purpose, but because very few words were actually required. Reyes entered the command post the way she entered every room, without ceremony, without performance. She stood at ease across the small briefing table from General Holt, her expression the same neutral, steady expression she'd worn since arriving at Kestrel, like someone who'd prepared for whatever came next by not needing it to be anything in particular. Holt studied her for a moment, a man looking at something he'd misjudged and trying to understand where the error had started. "I asked who gave you that rifle," he said. "Yes, sir. I was wrong to ask it." She held his gaze. Didn't agree quickly, didn't deflect, didn't make it easy or hard. Just received it the way she received everything. Evenly. I want to know, he continued, what you saw on that ridge. Walk me through it. So she walked him through it, in the same flat, precise language she'd used her whole career. The muzzle signature at position 1. The geometry of the partner position, which she'd anticipated based on the tactical logic of two-person overwatch on a linear target. The wind reading. The distance estimate. The decision to hold through his interruption because the window she needed was opening and interruptions didn't close windows. When she finished, Holt was quiet for 10 seconds. You had the second position located before I started talking to you. Yes, sir. And you waited. For seconds, sir. The first shot opened his position. Holt let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. If I'd pulled you off that weapon, the convoy would have hit the ambush at the checkpoint, sir. He nodded once. Not the nod of a man agreeing. The nod of a man accepting something he can't change about the last 40 minutes of his life. Your evaluation scores are already logged, he said. 30 for 30. Yes, sir. He looked at her one more time. Your next posting hasn't been confirmed. I'm making a call this morning. She didn't ask where. She didn't lean forward, didn't change her expression, didn't do anything that suggested she was waiting for a reward or expecting recognition. She simply stood there, exactly as she had stood every time someone had underestimated her, not requiring them to be better, just continuing to be exactly what she was until the facts became undeniable. Dismissed Staff Sergeant. She turned and walked out. No smile, no exhale of relief, just the clean, deliberate step of someone who had nothing to prove and had just proven it anyway. By 0800, word had moved through Firebase Kestra the way word always moved through small military installations, faster than official channels and louder than anyone authorized. In the motor pool, 2 mechanics were replacing a tire on the vehicle that had taken shrapnel during the attack. You hear about the 2 a.m. contact? Heard it wasn't a contact. Heard it was over in 2 shots. 2 shots, 2 positions, 740 meters. The man with the wrench looked up. 2 shots, 4 seconds apart. The wrench came down slowly. Neither man said anything else. In the mess tent, the story had more detail by the time breakfast was served. Dubrow, the range master who'd supervised the evaluation 2 days before, sat across from a table of infantry soldiers who hadn't been on the range. He listened to them describe what they'd heard, then set his coffee down. I watched her shoot 800 meters in a crosswind, he said. Every round. Nobody asked a follow-up question. Some things didn't need a follow-up. Strauss passed the duty sergeant's desk at 0830 on his way to the morning brief. The duty sergeant looked up from his screen. He still had her name on the board under observer attachments. He reached over and peeled off the strip. Got a new one. Printed her name again and stuck it at the top. He didn't explain why. He just did it. The convoy that had held at the eastern checkpoint arrived at Firebase Kestrel at 0630, delayed by the security hold but otherwise intact. 12 vehicles, 97 personnel, ammunition, fuel, medical resupply. The convoy commander, Major Elise Tran, sat down with the Kestrel intelligence brief at 0900 and read the after-action summary of the night's events. She read it once, then read the key section again. 2 enemy snipers. Ridgeline northeast. Neutralized at 0220 hours. 2 rounds, 4-second interval, 738 and 761 meters. Confirmed kills. She looked at the name at the bottom of the action report. Staff Sergeant Camille Reyes, Army. She handed the brief back to the intel officer. Is she still on base? Departs at 1400, ma'am. Major Tran nodded. I like to shake her hand before she goes. At 1,340 hours, near the landing zone where the outgoing cargo flight was being loaded, the 2 women stood facing each other in the early afternoon heat. Not long, not ceremonially. Tran extended her hand. Reyes shook it. Your convoy is why I took the shot, Reyes said simply. Tran held the handshake a moment longer than necessary. I know. That's why I'm here. And that was all. The cargo flight lifted at 1418. From the landing zone, a group of soldiers watched it rise and track east through the brown sky. One of them, a young specialist who'd been on the north wall guard post when the attack started, watched the aircraft until it disappeared. Did anyone get her name? He asked. The soldier next to him, a veteran of 2 prior deployments who'd seen things he measured in before and after, looked at the place where the aircraft had been. "Reyes," he said. "You know her?" "No." He picked up his weapon and turned toward the barracks. "But I know what she did." He walked away without elaborating. Some answers were complete, just the way they were. General Holt's call that morning went to the Army Special Operations Command Marksmanship Advisory Board. He put Reyes's name into consideration for a senior training and operational assessment role that hadn't existed in its current form before that morning's phone call. He didn't mention what had happened at 0217. He didn't need to. The after-action report said everything, and the report was already in the system, time-stamped, clean, and documented, the way things needed to be documented so that silence didn't fill in for facts later. The board reviewed her file. 30 for 30 in the evaluation. Night contact confirmed kills at maximum effective range. Prior service record. Fitness reports that used words like surgical, precise, and trustworthy under pressure. They approved the nomination in 40 minutes. Nobody on the board had been there the night before. Nobody had heard the question the general had shouted into the dark. Nobody knew about the 4 seconds she'd held her position while someone above her rank told her to move. But the score sheet spoke for itself. It always had. Would you have held that shot through the interruption? When a general was behind you demanding you stand down, would you have stayed in position, knowing what you knew about what was coming if you didn't? And here's the real question. How many people in that story, on that base, in that convoy, at that evaluation range, made an assumption about Camille Reyes before she proved them wrong? How many assumptions were they? How many of them ever got spoken out loud? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. Then hit that like button, tap subscribe, and make sure the bell icon is on. Because we post stories like this every day. Stories about people who didn't raise their voice, who didn't ask for recognition, who just did the work. Share this with someone who still thinks they can read a person by how they walk into a room. Your next story is already on your screen. Go watch it. We'll see you tomorrow. The rifle doesn't care who's holding it, but the shooter does.